This is not a podcast for comfort. It's a podcast for clarity. In a culture flooded with noise, dangerous narratives, and emotional uncertainty, this space exists to examine what actually matters and what actually works. Here we question power itself, belief systems, and the assumptions most people inherit without inspection. Most people accept instead of dissect. This podcast is about correcting that. Welcome. Bienvenue. Welcome. Marhaban. Bienvenidos to the Magnificent Ones podcast. Today I want to discuss something that is rarely discussed honestly. The things often overlooked by high performers. Most conversations about performance revolve around effort, discipline, productivity, execution, results. We celebrate output because output is visible. It can be measured, it can be praised, it can be compared. And that comparison is what separates great from good, average to above average to excellence. Let that sink in. But what is often invisible are the systems that make high performers sustainable. Many people know how to push. Fewer people know how to maintain. And even fewer people understand that maintenance is a part of performance itself. High performers tend to optimize what is obvious. Those are the things that are the schedules, the goals, and the results. But the quiet conditions that allow excellence to continue over years instead of months are often neglected. Today I want to talk about 5 areas that are often overlooked. These are what I personally deem to be very important. So maybe they're not important for you, but to me they are. Sleep and recovery, nutrition and energy stability, mental health and emotional regulation, aesthetics, and that is also tied in with the environment, and fashion and presentation. These may sound like lifestyle topics at first, but they're not. They're performance topics. Because performance is not only what you produce. Performance is how you can continue producing at a high level without breaking down mentally, physically, or socially. High performance is often visible. The systems that sustain it are usually invisible. If someone watched how you lived instead of what you produce, would they recognize you as a high performer? That question alone reveals a great deal. The first overlooked area is sleep and recovery. Many high performers, they treat recovery as negotiable time. Sleep becomes something to reduce when work becomes intense. Rest becomes something you earn rather than something you require. But think about that. Recovery is a part of the work, my friends. Athletes understand this clearly. No serious athlete expects improvement through constant exertion. Muscles grow during recovery, not during the workout itself. The same principle applies to the mind. The brain consumes enormous amount of energy. It generates fatigue, it accumulates strain, it produces heat, it requires restoration. Sleep is not simply the absence of activity. Sleep is a process during which the brain restores efficiency and balance. A tired person can still work hard. A tired person cannot always think clearly. And the distinction is critical. Effort can remain high while judgment quietly deteriorates. That's just a process of life. We think of ourselves as only living organisms, and just as a car can break down, human beings can break as well. We surely can. And this is how costly mistakes happen. Not because people are incompetent, but because they never pause long enough to regain clarity. Recovery serves 3 functions. First, biological restoration. Sleep restores cognition or cognitive precision. and emotional balance, reaction time improves, patience improves, focus improves. Second, mental distance. Recovery creates a space between you and your work. When you step back, you begin to see patterns that are invisible during continuous effort. And that's why they say hindsight is always 2020. When it's too far gone, that's when we say, man, looking back, if only I'd take the time to do this, if only I had done a little more of this, if only I had been more patient, or if only hindsight is always 2020. And that's when we kick ourselves when it's because we're looking back. And when we look back, we see the things that we neglected. I once watched a podcast, and it was a religious podcast. And the speaker stated in the podcast that the problem with successful people, highly successful people that have a meteoric rise or some type of success that just catapults them into the stratosphere. The problem with those individuals is that because success, it happens so fast, they don't see the fractures in their foundation, which results into their demise later on. If you're moving so fast that you cannot test your own mental stability to see where you're at, if you can't look at the fractures in your personal foundation, whatever that is, maybe that's your career, maybe it's your personal relationships. If you don't even see that there's fractures there and you keep building upon the structure that is called life, you eventually reach a point where everything comes tumbling down. And that is costly. That not only costs you financially in many cases it costs you your marriage. In many cases, it costs you your friendships. Those are things that are worth considering when we think of recovery and our cognitive abilities. If the mind goes, the body goes as well. And so I need you all to really think about that. If you go long enough without sleep, you will actually die. You will go crazy and you will die. And I'm not trying to be morbid or be distasteful. I'm just trying to simply highlight that performance, in order to be a high performing individual for a long period of time, you have to take sleep into account. You have to take care of the engine or the operating, system, which is your brain. My friends and I often, joke about that, and we say our internal operating system. And so you have to take care of your internal operating system. If you don't take care of it, how is it going to take care of you? How is it going to allow you to be the best version of yourself? How are you going to continue to climb the mountain of success or the corporate ladder if you are not able to think critically, if you're not able to think outside of the box when you need to because you're going through brain fog? How are you going to be the best version of yourself when you, the person, your body is also now fatigued and you're constantly getting sick in the process? And so I say this, many people confuse constant, activity with progress. But activity without reflection often reduces avoidable errors. Recovery is where reflection happens. Recovery is where adjustment happens. Recovery is where mistakes are prevented before they become expensive. There's a difference between making a mistake and then catching the mistake. And there's also a difference between making the mistake, catching the mistake, and preventing the mistake, which then ties into how to mitigate the effects of a mistake if a mistake has occurred, as opposed to prolonging the mistake because we're not focused and we're not in tune with ourselves to know that a mistake has even occurred. So the third thing that I would bring up within this segment of talking about recovery is strategic recalibration. Without recovery, effort becomes automatic rather than deliberate. You continue doing what you are doing yesterday without ever asking whether it's still correct today. We're not stress testing. And that's important. High performers are often believe progress comes from continuous effort, but progress usually comes from the cycles of effort and recovery, because it's within recovery is how we measure growth, right? When we go to the gym, how do we know that we got stronger? Not during the workout, it's after the workout. When you go back to the gym the next time, can you lift 100 pounds? The next week, can you lift 105 pounds? You're able to learn these things because your body had time to heal, your muscle had time to grow. And so then you are stronger as a result of taking the time to recover, heal, and grow. You know, re- Recovery is not the opposite of performance. And so that's what a lot of people think. If I slow down, that means I'm regressing. It means that I'm not being my most optimized self in effort and performance. No, sometimes you have to take a step back, slow down, recover, then execute, then strategize. It's kind of like not recovering. It's kind of like being sleep deprived and then wanting to go solve a puzzle or a Rubik's Cube. You're sleep deprived and you want to solve something that is rather complex. How successful are you going to be at certain things if you are not at your best cognitively, mentally, emotionally? That is a serious question to ask. Like how good are you going to be? How well are you going to perform when you are not at your best? And how do you even know if you're even at your best? If you're constantly moving forward without even taking the time to see how you are. How is your mental health in this context? Your physical health in this context. If you're not monitoring yourself, how do you know how far you can go? So I will leave this segment with this statement that recovery is the condition that makes the performance sustainable. And that's the perfect way to summarize recovery as a high performer. So when we're going to go into transition into nutrition and stability, for me, nutrition and energy stability go hand in hand. So it's kind of like a flow map. So first, sleep recovery. After that comes you wake up, you eat, and then by eating and a nutritious meal, you then have the energy to then perform. And so these things kind of flow into each other. Nutrition is often an area that is overlooked. Many disciplined individuals maintain strict workout routines, but inconsistent eating habits. They manage their calendars with precision, but fuel themselves randomly. Energy stability is one of the most underrated components of performance. Nutrition affects cognitive clarity, and long before it affects your physical appearance. So it's not that okay, 5 months from now you need a new pair of pants because your waist has increased. Sure, that happens, but your brain and how you operate and how you think every day based on how you eat, like those are things that are immediate effects. Like certain things you eat, it kills your energy. Certain things it makes you go into the quote unquote food coma, right? And so if you're eating like this and your body can't process the things that you're eating or drinking, then what happens? You're not able to perform. There's a lapse in your performance simply because you're not fueling the body with the things that it actually needs. So nutrition, many people assume that poor eating habits matter only in the long term, but the short term effects are often more significant than what people realize. Unstable nutrition produces unstable energy, and you need consistency if you're going to be successful. You need to consistently have a certain amount of output each day, right? And so if that becomes inconsistent, that means you're exerting effort, and in your mind you think you're exerting the same amount of effort that you did yesterday, but again, that's not the case. And unstable energy produces unstable thinking. If your energy fluctuates sharply throughout the day, your concentration will fluctuate with it. Your patience will fluctuate with it. Your emotional stability will fluctuate with it. Stable energy creates stable decisions. This is rarely discussed in professional environments, yet making quality depends heavily on consistent mental energy. And many high performers ignore early warning signs such as mental fog, irritability, difficulty concentrating, a shortened attention span. These signals are often appear long before exhaustion becomes visible or obvious. Nutrition is not simply about physical health. Nutrition is about cognitive reliability. Imagine having a smart car like a Tesla or something, or a self-driving car that took you where it wanted to take you, as opposed to you determining where the car should take you. Well, think of your internal operating system, your brain and your body. Where do you want your brain and your body to take you? If you're not fueling it correctly, how is it going to take you to the destinations that it's supposed to? That is something that is worth noting, my friends. And if your thinking is unstable, guess what? Your performance will eventually become unstable as well. And so with that, we'll transition now into mental health and emotional regulation. So I hope you can see the pattern here. Recovery, nutrition, mental health, and emotional regulation. To me, this is how my brain processes the world and how things flow into each other. And so I layered them the way that they make sense to me, and hopefully that transition to you just as well. So as I was saying, the third area is mental health and emotional regulation. This may be the most important area of all. It does not matter how well you perform. Eventually, if you cannot work effectively with others, professional environments are collaborative environments, right? Even exceptional performers must coordinate with teams, communicate with colleagues, and influence decisions. And this introduces a critical distinction. Performance is individual. Operations are collective. A person can be an exceptional performer and still damage the operation. High performance does not automatically produce operational understanding. Someone can execute tasks perfectly while disrupting workflow, communication, and team alignment. Performance does not equal operations. This distinction, must be understood in order to make sound business decisions and sound life decisions. One of the hidden consequences of high performance is isolation. When someone consistently operates at a high level, in a higher speed or higher intensity than others around them, distance develops because others can't keep up. Responsibility concentrates, pressure increases, and collaborations become more difficult. High performers often interpret this situation in a particular way. They say to themselves, everyone else is not keeping up. Sometimes that is true. But sometimes the real issue is different. Sometimes the performer has not slowed down enough to build systems that allow for others to participate. Sometimes the performer has not taken the time to understand the emotional landscape around them. Sometimes the performer is pushing forward without elevating the people around them. So they're rising and everyone else is just falling back and regressing and regressing and regressing. And before you know it, we create a situation where it truly is lonely at the top because we didn't create room for others to rise with us. And when this happens, performance on paper can remain high while the operations underneath begins to weaken. A high performer can quietly become a bottleneck. A high performer can quietly become a source of tension. A high performer can quietly become difficult to approach. Emotional regulation determines whether a high performer integrates into a functioning system. Colleagues, assess, approachability, stability, and predictability. Even technically correct decisions, can fail if they are delivered with impatience or tension. You can be an exceptional performer and still be a liability to an operation if you cannot work effectively with people. Sometimes a high performer believes if I slow down, everything will fall apart. And that belief often reflects the pressure they carry. But sustainable systems require alignment, not just speed. Reflection becomes essential here. Now, periodically, people stepping back to evaluate emotional and social environments prevent a high performer from confusing personal productivity with organizational health. We were talking about like toxic work environment. Yes, if people are slacking off, they're on their phone and they're not performing, they're not doing their job. Yes, those should be addressed. Laziness should be addressed. But performance, if people are performing and you're simply outpacing people because maybe you have a more experience than others around you. Maybe you've been doing this thing before everyone else even knew what this thing was. In a situation like that, you should be the one to slow down, show them the way. High performers should make the system stronger, not more fragile. And isolating others through your rise, guess what? You're making the system more fragile. You're creating that mental and emotional strain. And if your people hate you, you don't think that's going to affect you in the long run, short run? Of course it is. It will affect you. If people hate you and it doesn't matter how high you perform, if you are hated professionally and personally, eventually it will have an effect on you because you can't truly do it alone. You can't. That's just how the world is. We can't all do it alone, no matter what we think. And so now we're going to transition into the aesthetic environment. And that's the fourth overlooked area is aesthetics. Most high performers optimize time, but tolerate chaotic environments. Workspace, is filled with clutter, poor lighting, visual disorder, constant noise. Now, these conditions quietly consume attention. Order reduces mental friction. Chaos compete with thought. Your environment either supports your thinking or interferes with it. And so that's sometimes the thing that we don't optimize, right, is our environment. Sometimes we create an environment that literally distracts us. I mean, think of office spaces. Sometimes an office space becomes so personalized that we get so comfortable that we can't perform at our best. And that's just one example. So you have an office space that has lots of snacks, soda, whatever it is. You have lots of fun things in your office, and so you begin to perform high, but you're distracted, or you have to stop what you're doing to attend to something else. You're just all over the place. You're scatterbrained. There's too much visual stimulation, too much for you to just simply stay on task sometimes. So your output is still high, but imagine how much better it would be if you weren't dealing with distractions, whatever forms of distraction that is, whether it's even social media. There's lots of people who, prior to social media, they were the best at, giving effort or making decisions. And now they have a social media addiction almost. They constantly have to be on TikTok. They don't know how to put their phones down. That was a distraction they didn't have before. And now that they have it, now they're not as great as they were. And anyone can fall victim to social media addiction, I guess, because people want to be liked. People want to be desired. People want the distractions sometimes so they can reset. Right? And so they get lost in all of that, in that noise. Many people underestimate how strongly surroundings influence mental clarity. Now, visual noise produces cognitive noise. Order allows attention to settle. A deliberate environment is not about decoration. It's about psychological, coherence. A clear environment often reflects a clear mind. And a neglected environment often reflects divided attention. So what does your environment say about about where you are in life and what you think? Think about the people who, when times are chaotic, what happens? Their house becomes messy, their cars become messy, and then they become disheveled. And, every aspect of them becomes messy. Their workspace is messy because they're not in alignment with themselves. And so learning to quiet the noise in all of this is extremely important. And with that, we'll go to our final section, which is fashion and presentation. I think the final overlooked area is fashion and presentation. This topic is often misunderstood. Fashion is not about vanity, right? Fashion is about communication. Appearance is a form of nonverbal language. Okay. When I was going to school, there was this thing that we did every Wednesday. It was called Dressing for Success. We were in the 8th grade, I believe, when they started doing this at my school. And so we'd dress up, suit and tie, and you'd get extra credit for wearing your Sunday's best, as they would say. And looking back, it was very corny. But if you're the best dressed person and you're well maintained, oftentimes people translate that into you being successful. How you look is a language. You're telling people something without even noticing that you're telling them something most of the time. Some people, their fashion sense is intentional. And so they want to have the impact of attracting people to them. Sometimes our aesthetics, it repels people, or it repels them from us because we look like something that came out of a horror movie. And I'm exaggerating here. I'm speaking professionally, in the professional environment, in the corporate world. If someone at your office wore, I don't know, I don't even want to make that joke because I'm pretty sure it's real for someone. So I would say they wore, shorts, to Fortune 500 company or something, gym shorts and flip-flops and maybe a tank top. I'm pretty sure they would not be well received. But again, the corporate world is changing. And so maybe that is how some people deem it okay to dress. And that being said, in my world, that is not okay to dress that way. But hey, to each their own. And people interpret discipline and intentionality through presentation before they evaluate performance. And so there are lots of times if someone looks sloppy, they look disheveled. People go, you know what? That person sucks. I wouldn't want to work with that person. I wouldn't want to be on their team. Because of how they're dressed, their shirts on tuck, they just seem sweaty and like they're all over the place and scatterbrained and they just don't look presentable and well put together. And so that creates distance, right? You can be highly competent and still create doubt if your appearance is disorganized or careless. People experience you before they evaluate you. In professional environments, perception influences collaboration. And if you appear tense or fatigued, people may assume that you're unapproachable. If you appear disorganized, people may assume your work is disorganized. And even when these assumptions are incorrect, they still influence behavior. A tired person may appear angry. That's true. An exhausted person may appear to be, impatient when they're the most patient person, but they didn't have enough sleep. A disheveled person may appear to be unreliable. High performance does not eliminate perception, okay? And collaboration depends on how others experience working with you. Performance is what you produce. Presence is how others experience you. Fashion and presentation creates coherence between identity and outward expression. So intentional presentation signals stability, and stability builds trust. Okay? High performers are usually very good at pushing forward, but what they often overlook are the quiet system that allows them to continue. Recovery maintains clarity. Nutrition maintains energy. Emotional regulations maintains collaboration. Environment maintains focus. Presentation maintains trust. These things are rarely dramatic. They are rarely celebrated, but they determine whether excellence can continue over time. High performers focus on effort. Sustainable performers focus on system. And if performance disappeared tomorrow, what systems would you still be holding up? That's the real question. If we took away your performance, we took it out of the equation of who you are, what would be left? Ask yourself that question. What would be left? If this podcast challenged you, good. Clarity often does. The point here isn't consensus or reassurance. It's to leave you more precise than when you arrived. Keep what sharpens your thinking. Discard the rest. But don't confuse familiarity with truth. If this conversation mattered, follow the podcast and share it selectively with people who value depth and not noise. Until next time, stay disciplined with your thinking, selective with your attention, and honest about what you're really optimizing for.